Hello, my name is Martha Shanahan, and I am an employee at Orchard Cove, a fairly new one. Some of you may recognize me from some of the coach calling that we've been doing in these last few weeks, and some of you I have yet to get to know, but I hope to sometime soon in the future. I am also a licensed mental health counselor and a registered art therapist. I wanted to just take a minute to honor and talk about what you might be emotionally experiencing during this pandemic of COVID-19. A little over a month ago, we entered into what has grown now to be a worldwide pandemic. We began with restrictions of our daily lives as we knew them at that time, and it only progressed from there. We now are calling this a worldwide collective crisis, a time of intense difficulty, trouble, or danger. When we in our bodies experience crisis, we are perceiving that as a threat. And physiologically, when our bodies detect a threat, we respond with a surge of adrenaline. And in crisis, we use this adrenaline to spring into action. We quickly move into a problem-solving mode. We immediately put new policies, procedures, and behaviors in place. We're struggling with that transition, but we're all trying to get this grasp on this new way of life and how to survive. We're really in survival mode at that point with the adrenaline. We're not looking at this as a loss of our normal life, but we're looking at it as how do we survive through this crisis in this moment. So what happens to our bodies physically when we receive that adrenaline? Physically, we're going into our fight or flight mode. Our muscles tense up. Our breathing gets fast and shallow. Our digestion slows almost to a stop at some points. We feel tension all over. We're holding that in our body. Or we have tightness in our chest. All of this is happening because it's expelling all of that energy away from our essential bodily functions to our extremities, to our arms, to our hands, to our legs, to our feet. Because when our bodies were designed to respond in this life-threatening manner, it really was because at the time we were facing a saber-toothed tiger and we needed that adrenaline rush in our extremities to either fight that off or run fast enough away from it. Now, even though today we're not facing a saber-toothed tiger, our body is still responding to that crisis, to that threat, as if it is endangering our lives. And that is where all of our energy and adrenaline will rush to. But we can't sustain that in our bodies and in our lives for long. It was really designed for short-term life or death situations, not for us to carry with us for weeks. And so what happens when that adrenaline wears off? We are tired, exhausted, fatigued. And this is different in that most crisis happens very individually. But something like this that is happening so collectively, we as a whole, we as a society are hitting this wall of collective weariness because of this adrenaline wear off that we're all experiencing now a few weeks into this quarantine. And in that moment of weariness, it hits us then that this experience is a loss of what was our normal. And that settles in. And then we get this feeling, this gap, this hole, this feeling of grieving what we had, our normal lives, and settling into this new quote unquote normal that doesn't feel anything like normal. And that's all we're longing for is that sense of comfort and safety of how we've always lived our lives, that and that discomfort of that we don't have that anymore. So David Kessler came out, and he is one of the leading experts in the field on grief and loss. And he took Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief and defined them for us in relation to COVID-19. He said you could see us move through it collectively. Denial. This virus won't affect us. Anger. You're making me stay home and taking away my activities? Bargaining. Okay, so if I socially distance myself for 2 weeks, everything's going to be better after that, right? Sadness. I don't know when this will end. And acceptance. This is happening, and I have to figure out how to proceed. We may all be at different stages of this process. And keep in mind that grief is not a linear experience, and we can move in and out of these stages fluidly, depending on the day, the moment, our emotional state, any additional stressors that are compounding this situation, like the power outage that we had. I don't know if anyone else felt that, but it just seemed like this unnecessary stressor that normally one would be able to cope with just fine, that sent you into a tailspin, that leaving you feeling very confused. But it was this unnecessary stressor that compounded an already stressful situation. So it's okay if one moment we feel like we're in acceptance and we slip back to sadness or bargaining. But how can we help ourselves move towards acceptance of this experience? Our first step towards acceptance is an awareness and an acknowledgement of our feelings and the emotions that we're experiencing. As humans, we tend to move into comparison and deny ourselves to actually sit with those feelings. Sometimes because it's uncomfortable, because sometimes we'll think to ourselves, how can I be this upset about not leaving my apartment when my neighbor 2 floors down is actually sick? I should feel lucky. I should feel blessed. I should not be complaining about these trivial things. But when we do this, it doesn't give us permission to feel our emotions and to sit with that and know that it's okay to feel like this is hard, because it is hard. The word emotion stems from the Latin word emovere. Excuse my Latin if that's not proper. It's not my strong suit. But emovere, e meaning out, and movere meaning move. Hence, to move out. Our emotions need to move out of us. But if we deny ourselves the ability to feel them, then they get stuck. And when they get stuck, they can also lead to feelings of shame and guilt that we feel those things. Again, if we're looking at in comparison to somebody else's situation that may be worse off than ours. And that only compounds our emotional situation that we're already experiencing. These feelings don't go away if we try and stuff them down, deny them, compare them away. They're still going to be there. And now we might feel guilty about feeling them or shame for feeling them. And now we've added to that already emotional state that we're in. We need to give ourselves permission to feel whatever it is that we are feeling in that moment, and to know that that is okay, regardless of what other people's experiences or judgments are on us or that we place on ourselves. And humans are emotionally complex. We can feel a multitude of emotions at once. So just because we might be having a frustrated moment doesn't negate the fact that we are appreciative and grateful for other things in our lives. It's okay to have multiple feelings all at once. I think that's what makes this so confusing sometimes. But we can feel sad and relieved, frustrated and grateful, anxious and fortunate. I keep hearing that phrase, our new normal. But I keep thinking to myself, but this isn't normal. And so it's not going to feel normal. And I think that if we keep looking and waiting for this to feel normal, we're setting ourselves up for a disappointment, because that is an unrealistic expectation. This isn't normal, and it's not going to feel normal. And I think that where we come into a hard place is that how can we define our new quote unquote normal when we are living in such uncertainty and there is so many things unknown. We don't know how long this is going to last, how severe it could get, when recovery is going to come into play, when are these restrictions going to be lifted. And a lot of times the unknown is uncomfortable for us as humans. So how do we proceed from here when we are living with such uncertainty? The unknown is such an uncomfortable and contrary place to be to what we as humans are programmed to believe and feel is safe. We are taught that certainty and control equals safety. And when we don't have that sense of certainty and control like we don't right now, we tend to feel unsafe. And that leads to feelings of fear and stress. So what can we do in a situation that we have little control over? I think that it's important to define what I cannot control and focus on what I can control. I cannot control the actions of others. I cannot predict what will happen. I cannot control how long this will last or how others react to it. I can control my own attitude. I can control following the CDC recommendations. I can control my own kindness and grace. I can turn off the news. I want to focus on 3 strategies that we can maybe tend to look towards in a situation that maybe have us feeling a little out of control. 1, we can choose to tell ourselves a more positive narrative. 2, we can focus on our own personal facts. And 3, we can acknowledge our feelings and use coping skills to navigate through this experience. As humans, when we feel fear and stress, that is presented to us as a problem, and we want to try and fix that real quick. And so what we try and do to control that situation is we try and solve the problem. And when we solve a problem, our bodies actually get a shot of dopamine, which makes us feel better for a moment. But the problem with that is that we often tend to go to the easiest solution, and a lot of times, unfortunately, that tends to be the what ifs and the worst case scenarios. And even though that's not the best outcome, we still get that shot of dopamine because we fixed the problem. We solved it. We know what's going to happen. And we get that shot of dopamine. It makes us feel a little better. The problem is it doesn't last because we don't know that that's true. And so the questions start to resurface and resonate. A better choice we can make is we can choose, instead of going the doom and gloom route, we can choose to tell ourselves a more positive narrative. Maybe that sounds like, I grieve for the lives lost. More will get sick, but many will recover. Social distancing is hard, but it will protect me and our society by flattening the curve. I believe the medical professionals are working tirelessly and will find a resolution. This is temporary and it will come to an end. Now, we don't know what the real solution is, what the real future will hold, but if we're going to choose to tell ourselves a story, instead of going to the worst case and the doom and gloom, why not choose to tell ourselves something that is more positive and uplifting? And maybe we have to tell ourselves this over and over and over again, but choosing the more positive narrative is going to have a better outcome on our emotional state. Instead of trying to focus on the what ifs and the things that we don't know, the uncertainties and the unknown, we can focus on what we do know. And I like to think of these as what our own personal facts or truths are. And those are going to vary and differ from person to person and even day to day, depending on how we're doing. But maybe that sounds like, 1, I can't control that I have to stay in my apartment. but two, I can control how I choose to use my time. In this moment, I am healthy and safe. I can breathe deeply and intentionally. I can move my body. I've been trying to practice this by writing 5 personal facts at the beginning of my day that helps me to focus throughout the day on things that I know to be true for me. And again, that can be different for everybody. So another example, it might look like this. I can't control what's going on in the world. I am choosing to abide by what is asked of us for the protection of myself and my community. I can be selective and limiting of my news sources and intake. I can call my loved ones to connect. I have a community of support people I can reach out to if things start to feel overwhelming. Or maybe it sounds like this. I am having a hard day, but I was able to get out of bed. I got myself dressed. I have a quart of ice cream in the freezer, and tomorrow is a new day. Our goal can't be to return to normal because we can't control that and we don't know when that's going to be. But we can choose to acknowledge our feelings and focus on using our coping skills to navigate through this experience. So I just wanted to share with you a couple of concrete coping skills that may help you in moments where you might be feeling overwhelmed. They're just little snippets, and if people are interested, perhaps in a future slideshow, I could go into more in depth about some of them. But just to give you a couple things to start with. Movement is our body's natural antidepressant. And I know that that can be a struggle right now because so many of us are longing to get back to that exercise class, get back to the fitness center, go on our long walks around the building outside or for even in the hallway for that matter. But I urge you to try and tune in to Chris and Carrie's classes or find some way in some small manner to move your body. It is not only an effective treatment for depression, but is also one of the #1 recommendations for anxiety. And I think those are a couple of things that we're all, and a big reason why that is so effective for anxiety is because when I was talking in the beginning of this presentation about when we are going to fight or flight, when we're facing that saber-toothed tiger and all of that energy is going into our extremities, it needs to be dispelled. Usually we would use that energy to fight or to run, but we're not doing that right now. And so all of this energy is built up in our bodies and we really need to move to get it out. So if you can find a way to move, by golly, do it. Natural sunlight. I know, another thing we're missing at this time during our indoor quarantine, but to find a way to be intentional about it. Make sure we're opening those blinds, maybe even making sure we sit by an open window for 15 to 20 minutes a day. That natural sunlight, it stimulates our brain's production of serotonin. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that contributes to our body's feelings of well-being and happiness. And it's really important. There are so many studies shown about seasonal affective disorder. When we have less natural sunlight intake, it leads to increased feelings of depression. And so just be intentional about trying to get that. Deep breathing. Deep breathing decreases the stress hormones of that our adrenaline response released. Again, when I was talking about that adrenaline and anxiety in moments of crisis, one of the physical responses was that our breath tended to get very short and rapid. We need to bring that back down. So really focusing on that deep breathing. And someone once explained it to me that we learn to breathe very shallowly in general. And what really struck home, and perhaps it's because I'm a mother of young children, but they said when you watch a baby sleeping and you're seeing them breathe. You see their belly go up and you see it come down. But we don't breathe like that. And so they said a great exercise is to lay down, maybe in your bed, on your back, and put a hand on your heart and a hand on your stomach. And when you take that deep breath in, make sure that your stomach is going out so that hand on your stomach can feel your deep diaphragm fill up with air, and then your chest one come out. And then you breathe out and you feel the chest hand go down and the stomach go down as you empty out the air to make sure that you're really getting that full depth of a breath. Another really great example is called square breathing. You breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and do that again several times. It really regulates your breath. It brings your rapid breathing down, and it brings your adrenaline hormones and stress down into a calmer state. A lot of times we can get caught up in the what ifs and the unknowns of the future, and that can begin to feel very overwhelming, especially when we're looking at that big whole picture and there's so many unanswered questions and unknowns. If we start to feel like we're getting a little overwhelmed in that state, it's really important to begin to ground ourselves and focus on mindfulness and the here and now and the present moment. So a really great exercise for that, if you really want to start to feel grounded quickly, if you're starting to escalate into overwhelmingness, is to list 5 things that you can see around you in this moment. 4 things that you can physically touch or feel. 3 things that you're hearing right now in the here and now. 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. And a lot of times it brings you out of that state of overwhelming and back into the present moment to what you're experiencing through your sensory intake right now in this moment. And of course, one thing that I've already seen come out of many of you in the community, and if you haven't tried your hand, I would urge you to do so, but the act of creation or creativity. It provides you with an opportunity to process your feelings and your experiences, but it also gives you a sense of control and choice. I think a lot of times when we're feeling out of control or limited and restricted in our choices, sometimes we need to grow that area in another aspect of our lives. And I think that that sense of creativity and production can aid in growing those feelings, whether that's through poetry or art or making music. Those are things that are going to give you the ability to create what you want to create. I was recently watching some reruns of Bob Ross. If you remember his PBS show back in, it must have been the late 80s, early 90s, but I was watching some reruns with my children and I was learning some new things about him. And one of the things I learned was that he was in the military for 20 years. And I didn't know that. And he was saying that being in the military was very much living in someone else's world and by someone else's rules. And he believed that he was able to sustain that life for so long because he could always come back to the canvas. And that is where he got a sense of control, that he could choose to put whatever he wanted or to create whatever world he wanted to create on that canvas. And I think of creativity being a very good coping skill through something like this when we feel very out of control and in a world that we have lack of choices in. How do we grow those other areas in other ways than our normal sense? And I think that creativity and creation can be an effective answer to that right now. So if you haven't given it a try, like some of your peers, pick up a pencil or a paintbrush or a musical instrument and try your hand. Thank you for joining me and for giving us an opportunity to just honor that this is an emotional experience and that this is hard and that that's okay. And I hope that something that I provided you with in this presentation is helpful in some small way or another to some of you. Thank you, and I look forward to getting to know all of you in the future when we're back together at Orchard Cove.